convergence across the members and more cohesion within each of the members. And they thought that some instruments were useful, like cohesion funds. A bit later, we then point at cohesion funds. Some instruments of solidarity were useful, but you would not need much. It would be kind of a trickle-down effect of economic integration. Personally, I think that this original inspiration of the Founding Fathers is something we have to reconnect with. It is indeed very important. And even if it may not be sufficient to convince public opinion at large about the importance of the European project, if you cannot even deliver this, you will see the legitimacy of the project diminishing steadily. And so, as you say, for the first time in the history of the European project, we see divergence. Because as a matter of fact, the Founding Fathers' belief was vindicated. It did work. It did work. We've seen that. Upward convergence and more cohesion within each of the member states. It did work. Until, say, 2004, 2008, it's not working anymore. Basically for two reasons. The fundamental design problems of the monetary union, which lead to divergence instead of convergence. And secondly, because we have in the enlarged Europe, we have some countries like, say, Romania, which seem not to be able to converge easily. Now, so this is extremely threatening, and indeed I think we must put convergence as a necessity high on the agenda. Let me give two more thoughts on this, then I'll stop. The first point, we are not simply seeing divergence, we are inputting more divergence to come. Let me refer to a paper which David Rinaldi, who is present here also, David and I wrote a paper for a conference of European think tanks. The paper has been published, it is online, the conference was called Vision Europe Summit. The paper is also been published in French and in English by the Delors Institute. So David Rinaldi and I wrote a paper in which we documented the actual divergence, not just in terms of economic growth, not just in terms of employment and poverty, but also in terms of skills and skill formation. And moreover, what we show in this paper is that if you look at the effort for education, you see that countries like Germany, but also Poland, are investing heavily in their education systems and also reforming them with very good consequences, by the way. Both Poland and Germany have been pursuing pretty successful educational reform and rather egalitarian educational reform. And they are putting money in it. But on the other hand, you see Portugal, Hungary, Romania, Italy also, according to our statistics, not just lagging behind in terms of public effort for education, but even cutting drastically. So we are inputting more long-term divergence to come. And I think this is extremely threatening, and that is the reason why David and I say this should be much higher on the EU agenda, because this kind of long-term divergence which we are creating, if you simply look at what we're doing in education, this is going to sap the sustainability of the monetary union in the long term. Second thought, going back to the Founding Fathers. So the Founding Fathers had a kind of a trickle-down vision on convergence. So you integrate economically and you will see the good consequences. They were vindicated. They were vindicated until, let's say, 10 years ago. I think there is an increasing awareness, certainly at the level of the European Commission, that convergence is something you have to organize. And you have also to organize it, for instance, by setting aspirational standards in social domains, like certain standards for the quality of your labor markets, certain standards for the quality of your unemployment insurance systems. You see traces of this new thinking in Commission publications, and they are also working on this. which basically means that convergence is something you have to work for. It will not just trickle down. And working for it means setting aspirational standards in a number of domains. Sorry for this very long answer, but it's something that exercises me a lot.
That's, I'll push it further. Because it's very interesting what you say, but it looks to me that there is a trap in this design, because on the one hand, okay, we all feel that there is something wrong with this divergence that started in 2008, and at the same time we think, okay, maybe we should invest more in education, we should have better active labor market policies, we should have this social investment welfare that would solve a lot of problems within the countries and between the countries. But then at the same time you have the budget constraints, which are gigantic in some countries. So how can you have better policies nationally, while at the same time you have to cut the expenditure? So, and also because there is this national dimension, at the same time we want to think of European policies, but can European policies be simply you have to invest more in education, or you have to improve the quality of education?
No, and I admit that it's easy for me to say this here on a Sunday morning behind this desk. It's much more difficult to implement it for fundamental reasons. Because if you say, like David and I do in that paper, if you say a number of countries badly need more investment and public investment in their education systems, whilst the same countries are in budgetary very dire straits, you are implying that they have to make very tough and difficult choices, like indeed reforming their pension system, cutting pension spending, etc., which I think is necessary in a number of countries. So you are implying very difficult choices, and therefore I think if you really mean it, the EU should create more room of maneuver for those countries by very thoughtful flexibility in the budgetary process linked to such things, or even more, a real solidarity in reform. Now, this is a difficult issue. Let me come back to an idea that has been floating around in Brussels and then killed. The idea emerged already in 2013. The idea was that at the level of the EU, there would indeed be some extra funding, extra support for certain countries based on what was called contractual arrangements, whereby there was a kind of a quid pro quo. So the Commission would say, okay, we are ready to give you resources in kind of a new fund. You use those resources to reform your economy or your labor markets. You buy some time in budgetary terms, but you trust you will deliver. This was called the idea of contractual arrangements. No, it's not. Yeah, you can. Project bonds is an example. It's a device to do that. Personally, I thought that this was a very interesting discussion. The way the European Commission formulated was too much top-down, principal agent control. And this is one of the problems, I think. But there was even no discussion, because the idea was completely killed in the Council, I think by a majority of everybody against one or something. It was completely killed. And if you ask yourself, why was this good idea, fundamentally maybe good idea, that would create room of maneuver and would create some sophistication and would maybe create solidarity in reform, why was that killed? Well, a country like Belgium, which is normally in favor of such an idea and which is kind of pro-European, the Belgian government was totally fed up with the Commission's interference in our wage indexation system. Rightly, I think. The Commission should not bother about that. There are more important problems in the world. So the Belgian government was totally fed up with the Commission bureaucracy and said, we don't want anything anymore of that kind. Other governments simply did not like the idea that there would be more solidarity. And so there was a coalition of people fundamentally, I would say, cemented by distrust in the institutions and unwillingness to make any further step, which would be a combination of pooling of sovereignty and solidarity. We have to come to terms with that. We have to overcome that. We really have to overcome that. So I think it's a bit like jumping. This the Belgian example I've given of this. You jump into a different situation whereby indeed you have some constraining elements, you pool some sovereignty, but simultaneously you organize some solidarity in reform. That's what you need to do. It's a political battle. And I hope that, that this will come on the agenda in one way or other again. And as a matter of fact, if you read the report published by the 5 presidents, President Draghi, President Juncker, President Schulz, President Dijsselbloem, and President Tusk, if you read the report published before the summer on the future of the monetary union, luckily you see some traces of this kind of thinking. Cautiously and with a lot of postponement, but you see traces of this kind of thinking. So I'm not absolutely in despair, but I think we should look at it and try to enlarge the opportunities for that.
Do you think this can happen in the current commission? Because Juncker said from the beginning, my commission is going to be more political. Okay, it's not from the same political area as people are in this office, in this room now, but they also said at the beginning we want to have this social AAA, so can we trust that maybe Juncker can take this discussion again, put discussion again on the table?
Yes, I think this commission, more than the previous commission, normally should be fit for purpose. Its political balance is better, I would say, than the previous commission. Moreover, indeed, Juncker promised it, in a sense. And what has been published, let me simply repeat, this 5 presidents report, in which the Commission input obviously was important. If you look at the 5 presidents report on the future of the monetary union, I would say it's not too bad. You can look at these documents in two different mindsets. You can say, all this vague talk, a lot of postponement. Why don't they see the urgency? Why is it not operational? This is the more dismissive, cynical approach. I think we'd better be a little bit constructive and say, well, it is vague. It's more a research agenda than a political answer for tomorrow morning. But anyway, the basic analysis that you need more solidarity, you need solidarity mechanisms. One day you'll need a stabilization device. You need to work on convergence via standards, also in the social domain and the employment domain. It's all in the document. It's all in the document. But it's more a research agenda. And so I think we have to push the Commission to work on this. I must say, I'm a bit worried myself. I have a concern because obviously if you shout, we go for AAA social Europe, and then you don't deliver, every belief is lost. And I would like Mrs. Marianne Thijssen, the Commissioner for Social Affairs, to be a little bit more bold also. I think she's working very cautiously, a bit in the shadow of Mr. Juncker. And I find that politically a dangerous course. It's a dangerous course. She should be more bold and taking this up and making it more a political debate, I would say.
Well, since we're talking about this, I have to say I'm a bit worried of the Commissioner for Social Affairs, Commissioner Thijssen, because all she's talking about and she's promising is this mobility package. And I think that's a big distraction from the social Europe topic, in the sense that, okay, we can manage mobility a little bit better than this, there is no doubt, but it only concerns a very small percentage of the European population. So what are we going to do for all the others that, for any reason, don't want to move or cannot move? And promising, I think it's really misleading. It's a little bit of a trap, because we're promising, we're going to do this big mobility package, but I find it just an excuse not to talk about the important things like this convergence issue or the unemployment benefits, the European unemployment insurance, for example, on which she seems to be a bit, I would say at least not interested. So how do we For sure.
Yeah, but let me disagree a little bit with you, Ilaria, on this. I think this mobility package, which he promised indeed for November already, the mobility package is not wrong, it's not unimportant, but I would say if there is only this mobility package, we are in a very defensive, reactive, defensive mode of thinking. Let me first explain why I think it's not unimportant. First of all, the mobility package, so the idea that we should reconcile the mobility rights of European workers and persons with social regulation also on the whole front. It was demanded by people like Lodewijk Asscher, the Dutch Social Democratic Minister of Social Affairs. He absolutely wanted such a thing because he believes, I think rightly, that the European framework on mobility creates too much scope for fraud and illegal circuits, notably in the context of posting of workers. I will not go into the detail of that, but I think first of all he's right. Secondly, politically, I think he must indeed, and not just Mr. Asscher, but he must be able to explain to his rank and file that yes, there is mobility, but mobility does not mean social dumping, fraud, illegal circuits. But more fundamentally, I would like to make the following argument, but it would take another hour, so I just mentioned it. I would like to make the following argument. The problematic that someone like Lodewijk Asscher is putting on the table, philosophically, is exactly the opposite problematic of the problematic that Mr. Cameron puts on the table. It's exactly the opposite problematic. The Dutch government will not say that. They will not say that. But it's the opposite problematic. What Mr. Cameron is looking for is exceptions to the fundamental principle that if you move around in Europe, you move to another country, you enter without any discrimination into the solidarity circle of that country. This is a fundamental principle of the EU. And Mr. Cameron wants exceptions to that principle. Okay. Lodewijk Asscher, who inspired partly this mobility package, Lodewijk Asscher is upset by the exception to the principle, which is posting. But posting of workers is an exception to that principle. And so, politically, it's important to say that, I think. He's fighting an exception to the principle, and Mr. Cameron wants more exceptions to the principle. Now, in public opinion, all this is fudged into one issue, but it's two very different issues. And so I would also think that the Lodewijk Asscher agenda, which has been instrumental in making place and move on mobility, is not a bad agenda. But then I rejoin you. If it's only this agenda, it is indeed very defensive. We need a more offensive and a broader agenda on the social role of the EU. You know that I've been arguing for a European social union, which would be a union of welfare states, not a European welfare state, but a union of welfare states, whereby the EU would, in a sense, be a kind of a holding company, organizing some stability mechanisms, organizing support for some of the systemic functions of welfare states, not all of them, but where it is necessary. Creating common orientation, working really for convergence. So a union of welfare states indeed would be much more than simply concerned with the mobility package. There I agree.
Thank you, Frank. I would have at least another 1,000 questions for you, but maybe I'll leave some space for the others because I imagine I have some. Before we